Welcome back to Zero to Hero, the series where we teach you how to teach yourself how to play Pokémon VGC. We're back with another comprehensive match analysis, and we're in for a real treat today. The 2025 Pokémon World Championships just concluded, and we're taking a look at the finals of this event. With a completely stacked tournament, there is a number of incredible matches to take a look at, so if there's a specific match from the event you would like to see broken down, make sure to leave a comment. With many VGC powerhouses falling as the top cut progressed, we see James Evans and Giovanni Cischke make their way to the finals. As usual in this series, we will analyze each team, consider the matchup, then take a turn-by-turn look at each game in the set. And just before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more VGC content. James Evans is a longtime VGC player and has a number of tournament wins. Having played for quite some time, he actually already won the World Championships back in 2018, albeit in the Seniors Division. He also won EUIC that same year, also in the Seniors Division. Looking at his Masters placements, he won the Vancouver Regionals in 2022 and 2024. He also has a number of top placements, including second place at Milwaukee 2023 and Knoxville 2024, top 8 at EUIC 2023, top 4 at Orlando 2023, and top 16 at EUIC 2025. Giovanni Cischke, on the other hand, is still a strong player. Despite not having won a major event yet, he does have a number of notable achievements to his name. He has a pretty solid list of top 64s dating back to 2022, with top 8s at San Diego 2023, Vancouver 2025, Portland 2025, and top 32 at NAIC 2025. Both of these incredible players absolutely deserve their spot in the finals of the biggest event of the year. Now let's take a look at the players' teams, and we'll take a look at James's first. He has posted his EV spreads publicly, so we'll have this available this time around. He brought Koraidon, Calyrex Shadow Rider, Incineroar, Brute Bonnet, Landorus, and Raging Bolt. Koraidon made an incredible showing at Worlds this year, and we see it on both teams in this finals, although they are both built differently. James's Koraidon has a clear amulet, boasting Flare Blitz, Collision Course, Flame Charge, and Protect, with Terra Fire. This set leans more on the safe side, with Clear Amulet giving Intimidate immunity and immunity to things like Speed Control from Icy Wind. Terra Fire is very standard on Koraidon and gives resistances to types that its base typing is weak to, like Fairy and Ice, while also boosting its Fire type attacks, comboing very well with the Sunnet sets. Having Flame Charge gives Koraidon a way to increase its speed while still dealing solid damage thanks to the Sun and Terra boost. With just one boost, it outspeeds most Scarf Pokemon and even faster threats like Calyrex Shadow Rider. Flare Blitz deals huge damage in the sun, and Collision Course is a safe, high base power move that has its power increased when dealing damage to something it's super effective against. This is useful against Pokemon like Incineroar, Chi-Yu, Brute Bonnet, Zamazenta, and other Pokemon that are weak to fighting, and can give Calyrex Shadow Rider trouble. Speaking of Calyrex, this Pokemon is very threatening with its high speed and powerful spread attacks, but it is very vulnerable to Dark-type Pokemon that resist both its stab moves and can hit it hard with 4 times super effective attacks. Having a fighting type on the team is very beneficial to deal with normal and dark types that give Calyrex trouble, hence why we see these restricteds perform so well together. James's is a Focus Sash variant with Terra Ghost, Astral Barrage, Psychic, Protect, and Encore. This is a more defensive Calyrex that relies on its Terra for big damage, but can support the team with Encore to lock opponents down into moves they might not want to be locked into. Incineroar has its standard options on this set, running Fake Out, Knock Off, and Parting Shot, but it is running some less common options in Reg I. Helping Hand was seen on only about 10% of Incineroar at this event, and it allows it to boost other offensive threats on the team. While the Rocky Helmet was more common at the start of the format, it has dropped to just 23% usage on Incineroar. This helps against physical attackers to chip them when they attack. We see Terra Water, which removes all its weaknesses and gives resistances to things it was weak to, primarily water itself. Regardless of the set, Incineroar still does Incineroar things, using Fake Out, Intimidate, and Parting Shot to slow down the opponent and allow the user to position more easily. Brute Bonnet is a very interesting pick, as it was seen on just 2% of teams at Worlds, a very uncommon pick for the format. It was more common on Koraidon teams, as it gains a defense photosynthesis boost in the sun, functioning as a significantly bulkier Amoonguss with powerful tools in Rage Powder and Spore. It also has key resistances to 2 of the most common restricteds in Miraidon and Calyrex Shadow, giving it an incredible matchup into this field. James also ran Sucker Punch and Seed Bomb for offensive stab attacks. He also ran Terra Water here, again for its defensive capabilities, and a Covert Cloak, primarily for a Fake Out immunity. Landorus Incarnate is next on the team, and was running an incredibly standard set for the Pokemon, with Earth Power, Sandsear Storm, Sludge Bomb, Protect, and a Life Orb, comboed with Sheer Force. This Pokemon hits very hard. Terra Water, again, we see on Landorus, was its second most common Terra type at the event, giving James 3 Terra Waters on the team. It hits hard, is relatively fast, and has an immunity to electric attacks, which is an asset with Pokemon like Koraidon and Raging Bolt being so common. Raging Bolt is last on the team, and is also running a pretty standard set. An Assault Vest makes this Pokemon quite bulky, but it still hits hard with a special attack boost from Photosynthesis in the sun. Along with Terra Electric, it hits very hard with Thunderbolt, Thunderclap, and Volt Switch. Dragon Pulse is also used to hit opposing Dragon type super effectively, or Pokemon that resist or are immune to its electric attacks. So what's the game plan of the team? Many CSR teams lean towards balance or hyper offense. The more common Calyrex Shadow team archetype is CSR and Zamazenta, and those teams lean much more towards balance, being able to use multiple bulky Pokemon to pivot around and get Calyrex in safely to sweep games. But with Koraidon over Zamazenta, the team lends more to hyper offense, thanks to a Sun boost that can enable Fire-type attackers and Photosynthesis Pokemon. James's team really is a solid mix between these two, and would fall more under a Sun balance team. Koraidon and Calyrex still hit very hard, but are still built somewhat defensively with tools like Focus Sash and Clear Amulet. Raging Bolt is still built to be bulky with an Assault Vest, and it still hits hard with a Photosynthesis boost and Terra Electric. Supportive options in Incineroar and Brute Bonnet also aid in this balanced playstyle. So the team aims to position offensive threats in Shadow Rider, Koraidon, and Landorus properly, while still applying defensive pressure with Incineroar and Brute Bonnet. Let's take a look at Giovanni's team. It includes Koraidon, Lunala, Brute Bonnet, Chi-Yu, Fluttermane, and Ursaluna. Let's take a closer look at his Koraidon. It's much more offensive than James's is, as it runs a Life Orb and Close Combat over Clear Amulet and Collision Course. Although it lacks the immunity to stat drops, if unintimidated, it deals significantly more damage across the board with Close Combat, especially against neutral targets where Collision Course doesn't get a damage boost. This does make Koraidon more vulnerable with the defense drops from Close Combat and taking Life Orb damage, but with the rest of the playstyle of the team, these negative effects can actually be beneficial. Typically, we will look at the other restricted next, but in this case we'll look at the rest of the Sun mode on the team first. We see Fluttermane running an interesting tech choice on this otherwise standard set. The moves are very standard in Moonblast, Shadow Ball, Icy Wind, and Protect. It also gains a speed boost from Photosynthesis, which allows it to outspeed everything in the format, and slow them down with an Icy Wind to aid in speed control. A Focus Sash is also common on Fluttermane to allow them to run more offensive investment while still surviving attacks. The tech choice mentioned here is the use of Terra Stellar. Terra Normal and Terra Fairy are by far the most common Terra types, making up 90% of Terra types on Fluttermane. Normal grants it immunity to opposing ghost types like Calyrex, Lunala, and other Fluttermane, while Terra Fairy gives it a damage boost to its fairy attacks. Terra Stellar here still gives a damage boost to Moonblast, but it allows it to get increased damage from its Shadow Ball and Icy Wind if needed. This Fluttermane is very offensive, as we see a recurring theme with the offensive Koraidon. Chi-Yu is our next pick and is also very common on Sun teams. It is a set that is as standard as it gets, with a Choice Scarf to outspeed other base 135s and Shadow Rider, and a moveset of Heat Wave, Overheat, Dark Pulse, and Snarl. It also has Terra Ghost for an immunity to Fake Out, as well as fighting attacks it's otherwise weak to. This Pokemon hits incredibly hard in the sun with its high special attack, stab fire attacks, and special defense reduction with its Beads of Ruin. It also powers up other special attackers on the team with its Beads of Ruin ability. Brute Bonnet is the last Pokemon on this team that is built for the Sun mode. We see the same set as James's with just one difference: Citrus Berry over Covert Cloak. Giovanni seemed less threatened by Fake Out, having 2 ghost types that are immune to it on the team, and 2 Terra Ghosts on other Pokemon. Although opposing Calyrex block the use of berries with its As One ability, Brute Bonnet is a very hard counter to Calyrex Shadow Rider. It can dissuade it from being on the field, allowing the berry to activate, or just remove it with Sucker Punch and eat the berry afterwards. Now we'll look at the other restricted on the team, Lunala. It combos well with Koraidon for similar reasons to Shadow Rider. It has a crippling dark weakness that is helped by having fighting coverage on the team. Lunala here is running a Power Herb with Meteor Beam for immediate offensive pressure and setup potential. It's also running Wide Guard and Trick Room to block spread attacks and give another option for speed control on the team. Terra Water is also common for Lunala, removing its 4x weaknesses. Lunala can function well with the 3 offensive pieces in the Sun mode, to benefit from Icy Wind speed control and hit hard with a special attack boost from Meteor Beam, while being aided from a Beads of Ruin from Chi-Yu. However, with Trick Room, it enables a second mode on the team, when comboed with the slow Brute Bonnet and our next Pokemon, Ursaluna. Ursaluna here is running the most standard set, with a Flame Orb for Guts activation, offensive moves in Headlong Rush, Facade, and Earthquake, while also running Protect. It functions as the main Trick Room sweeper when comboed with Lunala, and can be supported by Lunala and Brute Bonnet. So what's the game plan of the team? This is very much a Sunroom team with a highly offensive Sun mode, with Koraidon, Chi-Yu, Fluttermane, and Brute Bonnet. They can hit fast with high base speed Pokemon, Icy Wind, and Choice Scarf for speed control, and it hits incredibly hard with an offensive Koraidon, offensive Terra type on Fluttermane, Sun damage boosts, and Beads of Ruin boosts. Brute Bonnet functions as a defensive switch-in, and a redirector to help keep these offensive threats alive. The Trick Room mode seems to be mainly Koraidon, Lunala, Brute Bonnet, and Ursaluna. With the amount of damage Koraidon takes with Flare Blitz and Close Combat, as well as Life Orb Recoil, it can set the Sun, deal huge damage while Lunala sits Trick Room, and then KO itself with Recoil, or be easily removed with defense drops, allowing a safe switch into Ursaluna, while Lunala can start dealing big damage with Meteor Beam. Again, Brute Bonnet can keep the offensive threats alive, but also threaten fast spores in Trick Room. Identifying which mode is better in any given matchup is key. With both game plans laid out, what's the matchup like? James is all but guaranteed to bring both his restricteds, as they're integral to his game plan in the vast majority of matchups. With Calyrex bringing the most damage, and Koraidon setting the Sun for his Paradox Pokemon, they're both essential. Calyrex hits Lunala and Fluttermane super effectively, while Koraidon can take out Ursaluna, Brute Bonnet, and Chi-Yu in one hit. Giovanni needs to decide if he will go for his faster Sun mode, or his slower Trick Room mode. Either way, Koraidon will make an appearance. Incineroar for James is also guaranteed to be brought, as it can intimidate Giovanni's Koraidon, hit Lunala super effectively, and cripple Fluttermane and Ursaluna with knockoffs while providing fake out pressure. Since the Sun is guaranteed to be up in this match, it also makes sense for James to bring one or both of his Paradox Pokemon. Raging Bolt has strong priority damage as an option if Giovanni gets the speed advantage, whereas Brute Bonnet threatens Giovanni with sleep pressure. Both are possible brings, but both are vulnerable to Fluttermane's Moonblast, and take big damage from Koraidon's close combat, so they both have pros and cons. Back to Giovanni's picks, since the Sun will be up for pretty much the whole match, given there's 2 Koraidons, one on each team, it makes a lot of sense for him to lean into his Sun mode, with Fluttermane, Brute Bonnet, and Chi-Yu. Fluttermane and Chi-Yu outspeed James's whole team out the gate, while James has no hard speed control to speak of to counter this. The Trick Room mode, on the other hand, will take longer to set up, and with Fake Out and Redirection on James's side, he will have an easier time dealing with Trick Room than he will a fast Sun offense, so it's more likely Giovanni will bring his Sun mode in this game. Let's jump into game 1. James leads with Incineroar and Brute Bonnet into Gio's Fluttermane and Chi-Yu. Immediately, Gio is exerting incredible offense with these 2 strong special attackers, and Brute Bonnet is threatened by both fire and fairy attacks. Looking a little deeper into the board, however, Brute Bonnet is the most threatening piece on the field. Both of Gio's Pokemon are vulnerable to Spore, and Chi-Yu is vulnerable to a Fake Out as well. If James can keep Brute Bonnet alive and land a Spore, he will have a significant leg up in this match. In order to keep it alive, he commits his Terra Water and goes for Fake Out and Spore into Chi-Yu. Even if Chi-Yu goes for Terra Ghost, it will still fall asleep and won't deal huge damage into either target with the Terra Water from Brute Bonnet. Even if Gio swaps out into another threat, something will have to eat the Spore. Brute Bonnet terrestrializes into water, while Incineroar lands its Fake Out into Chi-Yu. Fluttermane Moonblasts Brute Bonnet for 57%, showing that if the hit was super effective, it would have picked up a one-hit knockout. While Chi-Yu flinches, Brute Bonnet lands its Spore into it, putting Chi-Yu to sleep. James no longer has Fake Out pressure, but Gio no longer has an offensive presence with Chi-Yu. This turn is where we see both players making plays, not to win the turn, but to win the whole game. Gio could just throw another Moonblast and finish off Brute Bonnet, since it doesn't have Protect, and nothing on James's team wants to eat a Moonblast. Rather than making this play, however, and allow Fluttermane to take damage from either target with a Sucker Punch or Knockoff, he realizes that Fluttermane's speed is his win condition in this match. With a speed boost, it outspeeds the opposing Calyrex and Koraidon, even if it gets a speed boost from Flame Charge. He switches out Fluttermane to preserve it and its Focus Sash for the late game, while bringing in his defensive piece and his own Brute Bonnet. James, rather than tunnel visioning on Fluttermane, attacks both slots. He goes for a Sucker Punch with Brute Bonnet, hoping to break that Focus Sash, and he goes for Knockoff into Chi-Yu. This will prevent it from moving before Calyrex or Koraidon should it wake up later. Fluttermane switches out for Brute Bonnet, while James's Sucker Punch fails into the switch. Chi-Yu sleeps the turn off, and Incineroar lands its Knockoff into Chi-Yu, removing its choice scarf. With Gio's Brute Bonnet on the field against James's Terra Water Brute Bonnet, Gio now has the Spore Pressure, as both of James's Pokemon are now vulnerable to it. Since James has his 2 restricteds in the back, switching in either of them right now is incredibly risky, as if his damage dealers get put to sleep, it could be all over for James. Chi-Yu could potentially wake up and take out James's Mushroom with a Dark Pulse. In order to cover for this, James locks in Spore again into Chi-Yu, despite it being already asleep. He also targets Gio's Bonnet with a knockoff to remove its Citrus Berry and a significant portion of its bulk. James likely wants a Pokemon to faint or be already asleep to get a safer switch into one of his damage threats, as clicking a sleep move into a sleeping target is a risky play. Chi-Yu sleeps another turn and doesn't get off any damage. James's Brute Bonnet attempts the Spore into Chi-Yu, but fails since it's already asleep. Incineroar knocks off Gio's Brute Bonnet, dealing just 11%, but removing the Citrus Berry. Then Gio's Bonnet moves last and puts Incineroar to sleep with a Spore. The game is now at what feels like a stalemate. Both players need to get some damage online, but neither can afford to swap in a threat and have it immediately put to sleep. Gio has a slight edge here since his Bonnet is still a grass type and is immune to Spore, giving him some leeway to switch it out, since using Spore into a Pokemon that's immune to it is a very risky read. Chi-Yu is more likely to wake up this turn and can fire a Dark Pulse into James's Bonnet to remove the Spore Pressure entirely. Gio could just Spore the opposing Bonnet and attack with Chi-Yu, but he decides the grass type on the field is enough protection against a Spore into that slot and swaps it out for Koraidon. Incineroar will have to take its guaranteed sleep this turn. In order to cover for both a Spore or a Wake Up Dark Pulse from Giovanni, James clicks Sucker Punch into Chi-Yu for a bit of chip, likely hoping it does wake up and take out Brute Bonnet to give him that switch he needs. Gio's Bonnet swaps out for Koraidon, setting the sun, activating James's Bonnet's Photosynthesis, giving it a defense boost. Incineroar sleeps the turn away, and Sucker Punch connects with Chi-Yu, although dealing only about 22%. Chi-Yu rolls a full 3 turns of sleep and again does not move this turn. With Koraidon on the field and Chi-Yu guaranteed to wake up this turn, Gio can now press his offense against James. Neither of James's Pokemon have Protect, but they can both switch. Dark attacks from Chi-Yu will deal big damage to Brute Bonnet or Calyrex, but will be resisted by Koraidon or Incineroar. Whereas fighting attacks from Giovanni's Koraidon will deal huge damage to Incineroar, Bonnet, or Koraidon, but will deal nothing to Calyrex should it switch in. He needs to choose his targets carefully and consider how James will defensively pivot, or if he will stay in and let something go down for a free switch. James actually locks in Helping Hand on Incineroar and Sucker Punch on Bonnet, as a Helping Hand boosted Sucker Punch will likely get the knockout on Chi-Yu. This play is really great for a few reasons. First off, it picks up the almost guaranteed KO on Chi-Yu due to it having just enough damage, and he's getting value from both of his support Pokemon on the field, while still likely letting one of them fall for a free switch afterwards. This play, however, does depend on Incineroar waking up and getting the 1-turn sleep. Incineroar does get the 1-turn wake, boosts Bonnet with a Helping Hand, and the Sucker Punch removes Chi-Yu. Koraidon lands a Flame Charge into Incineroar, dealing 20%, but more importantly gaining a speed boost. Giovanni brings his Brute Bonnet back in, also gaining a defense boost. This may have seemed like a worst case scenario for Giovanni, as Chi-Yu went down and he hardly got any damage off with Koraidon. But with the switch into Brute Bonnet, he can safely Rage Powder the opposing Brute Bonnet's Spore and be immune to it. This, combined with the speed boost, allows Koraidon to safely start picking up KOs with Flare Blitz or Close Combat, allowing it to outspeed James's faster threats when they hit the field. This Flame Charge into Incineroar also covered for it switching into Calyrex or Koraidon to get some chip onto them. Rather than redirect with Brute Bonnet, he decides to go full offense and locks in Close Combat into James's Bonnet and Spore his Incineroar. Even should James swap Bonnet out for Calyrex and be immune to the Close Combat, Koraidon is still faster, and whatever is in the Incineroar slot will fall asleep, leaving Calyrex in a 2v1. James does in fact switch Brute Bonnet out for Calyrex, which leaves Koraidon dealing no damage with a Close Combat into the immunity. Incineroar does go for Parting Shot into Gio's Bonnet, dropping its offenses, and James brings Bonnet back in, which eats the Spore, falling asleep. Now both players have a damage threat on the field, but Gio has the advantage with both Spore and Sucker Punch pressure into Calyrex. Not to mention James's Bonnet is still sleeping. Gio decides now is the time to go on the offense and commits his Terra Fire on Koraidon. With the speed advantage, he could double into Calyrex with a Flame Charge and Sucker Punch, which would both move before it, bring it down to its Focus Sash, and finish it off if they both connect. But James knows he needs Calyrex alive and can't risk having it fall asleep to a Spore, so a Protect is quite likely here. James sees this offense and protects Calyrex while attempting to damage Koraidon with a Sucker Punch should Bonnet wake up. Koraidon terras into a Fire type and Calyrex protects. James's Brute Bonnet sleeps the turn, while Koraidon takes the KO into it with a close combat. Spore is blocked by Calyrex's Protect, and James brings in his Koraidon. Battle tension is at its peak on this turn, as both players have heavy offense that can pick up KOs on either side. Geo can make the double up play into Calyrex for a KO, but James's Incineroar in the back can switch in, making this a solid defensive play. And that's just what James locks in. Going on the offense with Calyrex is still too risky at this point for James. If it goes down and Koraidon survives, the game will go to Geo. Geo, on the other hand, knows that a switch into Incineroar is James's best play, and when playing against the best players on the biggest stage, their best play is very likely. He sees this opportunity to switch Fluttermane into the field in Koraidon's slot. With a speed boost, it can still slow down James's team and deal big damage to one-shot Koraidon or Calyrex with Moonblast or Shadow Ball. Preserving it for so long, now is its time to shine. And if James does go for the Astral Barrage while Fluttermane switches in, Fluttermane will still survive thanks to its Focus Sash. He locks in the Sucker Punch into Calyrex to cover the slight chance that it stays in. Koraidon and Calyrex both switch out for Fluttermane and Incineroar. Brute Bonnet Sucker Punch fails into the incoming Incineroar, and James's Koraidon takes out Brute Bonnet with a Collision Course. Geo brings his Koraidon back in as the sun ends. Giovanni was also likely taking into consideration the sun turns when he swapped out Koraidon, as it was able to come back in at the exact time to reset the sun. Having the sun up is crucial for Giovanni, so that Fluttermane's photosynthesis is active. With Incineroar on the field, it could look like James can play defensively with a Fake Out into Koraidon, but Giovanni has a guaranteed way to make progress. If James goes for Fake Out, Fluttermane can easily one-shot James's Koraidon with Moonblast. If he goes for another move on Incineroar, a close combat will pick up a one-shot into it. Geo attacking with both still deals big damage if James makes a switch, trying to play around a close combat by bringing in his Ghost type. James, being on the back foot here, still does need to make some sort of read, and swaps out Incineroar for Calyrex, hoping to be immune to a close combat. If he can stall out the sun with smart switches, and gain the speed advantage with Calyrex being faster than Fluttermane after photosynthesis wears off, he could bring himself back into the game. Giovanni, rather than making the Moonblast close combat play to hopefully pick up 2 KOs, instead goes for a Flame Charge into Incineroar. This may seem like a hard read into the Calyrex switch, but it actually covers for Incineroar staying in, as it won't pick up a KO into either of these targets, and gives Koraidon an essential speed boost for when Calyrex comes in later. Incineroar hard switched into Calyrex, while Fluttermane removes Koraidon with a Moonblast. Geo's Koraidon lands its Flame Charge into Calyrex, bringing it to its Focus Sash, as James brings in his Incineroar. But James has no way around Geo's faster offense. We see him protect Calyrex, while Incineroar falls to a close combat, and Calyrex faints the following turn, earning Giovanni the win for Game 1. So what did we learn from Game 1? Well, we saw that James's Brute Bonnet moved first, meaning it's likely the faster one, and with a mirror matchup like this, having this information is crucial. Geo also perfectly identified that Fluttermane was his late game win con. He was able to switch it out early and find the perfect opportunity for it to come in late game and exert the pressure it needed to pick up the win. Geo also read many of James's switches perfectly. However, some of the plays that seemed like a hard read were actually just good all-around plays, covering for multiple possibilities from James. James still made many good, safe plays, but against this level of Sun Hyper offense, it can be hard to keep up while switching around when your opponent has such high damage on the board. We also saw that James got slightly better sleep RNG, as his Incineroar was able to wake up for that helping hand, while Giovanni's Chi-Yu slept for a full 3 turns. Both players know the matchup well, and are very unlikely to make any Pokemon changes at this point. Just before we take a look at Game 2, if you like this type of analysis, make sure to hit the subscribe button to see more of this going forward. In Game 2, we see the same leads as Game 1, with Incineroar and Bonnet for James, against Chi-Yu and Flutter for Geo. The same double up, fake out Spore pressure into Chi-Yu is still threatening, and a Terra Water is still likely to keep Brute Bonnet alive. But if James makes the same play as last game, he would likely find himself in another loss, considering he lost last game. And he might lose quicker this time, since he had quite good sleep RNG onto that Chi-Yu. He decides to change things up and goes for a Sucker Punch into Fluttermane and a knockoff into Chi-Yu, to ensure his restricted can outspeed it later, and break the Focus Sash on Fluttermane. Geo opts to preserve his Terra as well, by not committing a Terra Ghost on Chi-Yu to avoid a Fake Out. He won last game with Chi-Yu asleep the whole time, so that Fake Out Spore play is perhaps not as threatening as it seems. He doubles into Brute Bonnet to KO it if it goes for a Terra or not. Sucker Punch comes out and deals 67% to Fluttermane, while Chi-Yu's Dark Pulse and Fluttermane's Moonblast take Brute Bonnet down, while Chi-Yu eats the knockoff, losing its Choice Scarf. James brings in Calyrex. Immediately bringing the game into a 3v4 in Geo's favor, it may seem he has the significant advantage. However, having broke that sash on Fluttermane, which we've already identified is one of his most important pieces in the match, is quite significant. With Calyrex on the board and no sun in sight, and Chi-Yu's Choice Scarf removed, Calyrex is the fastest Pokemon on the field. With its Focus Sash still active, it's quite the threat. Geo would need to bring in Koraidon if he wants Fluttermane to outspeed it, but can't take it out in one hit, again thanks to its Sash. If Geo plays passively and switches in Koraidon, Fluttermane will go down and Koraidon will take huge damage from an Astral Barrage. Both players know Fluttermane is a huge threat in this match, so again Geo decides to preserve it by switching it out. Thanks to the Choice Scarf being knocked off, Chi-Yu can at least change moves, and even though it's slower than Calyrex, it's still a Dark type which can resist the Astral Barrage. And even a slower Snarl from Chi-Yu would completely cripple Calyrex, so James decides to protect it. James locks in Parting Shot to reduce Geo's damage and bring in more damage of his own. Fluttermane swaps out for Brute Bonnet as Calyrex protects. The Snarl connects with Incineroar, dealing minimal chip damage, and Incineroar's Parting Shot lands into Chi-Yu as James brings in his own Koraidon, setting the sun. On the surface, James has all the offensive pressure in the world. And to an extent he does. Attacking with both his restricted Pokemon is very likely. An Astral Barrage, although not very effective into two Dark types, will cover for the possible Terra Water on Geo's Bonnet if it fears a Fire or Fighting move from Koraidon. With this complementary offensive coverage, it puts Geo in a very difficult position. James locks in Astral Barrage and Flame Charge, but he Flame Charges into Chi-Yu rather than Brute Bonnet. This speed boost is very impactful as mentioned from last game, allowing it to outspeed the opposing Pokemon, and particularly the opposing Koraidon going forward, and it will still pick up the KO despite Chi-Yu resisting it. Giovanni, however, realizes that both his Pokemon are quite threatening. Snarl into Calyrex is still devastating, and a Spore into either slot will generate huge value. Although James exerts huge pressure into either slot, he can't really pick up both of them this turn. Geo Terras his Brute Bonnet, guaranteeing that one of his Pokemon will survive and can either chunk Calyrex with a Snarl, or put it to sleep with Spore. Calyrex lands its Astral Barrage into both slots, dealing 64% to Brute Bonnet, as Flame Charge finishes off Chi-Yu. Brute Bonnet does land a Spore into Calyrex, putting it to sleep, as Giovanni sends in his Koraidon. Now with Calyrex asleep, James has some tough calls to make. Should he switch Calyrex out, or keep it in and try to burn sleep turns? His last Pokemon is Incineroar, which will resist the possible incoming fire attacks into that slot. He also needs to figure out what to do with his Koraidon. He can't one-shot Geo's Koraidon, and using a fighting attack into Brute Bonnet for the KO is risky as Fluttermane could switch in and negate that attack as well. Geo is likely to Spore the Koraidon slot, as if it stays in, or if it switches, something will go to sleep either way. He also makes an aggressive read and locks Close Combat into Calyrex, expecting a likely switch into Incineroar, hoping for a one-hit knockout. James decides to protect his Koraidon, to scout for what Giovanni will do, and to block a likely incoming Spore. James's Koraidon protects, while Calyrex stays in and burns the sleep turn. Giovanni's Koraidon whiffs the aggressive read of Close Combat into Calyrex, as Brute Bonnet's Spore bounces off the Protect. We find ourselves in pretty much the same situation as last turn, but now Calyrex has a chance to wake up, and Koraidon can't safely protect. Brute Bonnet could possibly survive a neutral collision course thanks to its Terra and Defense Photosynthesis boost, and considering James's Koraidon is not as offensive as Geo's. He locks in Collision Course into Geo's Koraidon to rack up some damage. Geo selects Flame Charge into Calyrex, as even if Calyrex switches out, he will gain the necessary speed boost. And after landing a Spore into James's Koraidon, Geo will be in a good position with his Koraidon going forward. James's Koraidon lands the Collision Course, dealing 65% to Geo's Koraidon. Calyrex does not wake up and sleeps the turn away. Geo responds with a Flame Charge into Calyrex, dealing 57% and gaining that speed boost. Brute Bonnet lands a Spore into Koraidon, putting it to sleep. Geo is incredibly close to victory here. Both James's restricteds are asleep, and Giovanni has the speed advantage and offensive pressure. The only thing that can stop Geo from taking this set is James making perfect defensive play to get around all these sleep turns. He locks in Close Combat into James's Koraidon and opts to Spore the opposing Calyrex should it wake up this turn. Calyrex does wake up this turn, but goes for Protect. Geo's Koraidon deals 90% to James's with the Close Combat, as Bonnet's Spore is blocked by Calyrex's Protect. Very notably, the sun expires this turn. With Giovanni's Koraidon holding a Life Orb, it's on a timer for how many more attacks it can dish out. After Calyrex has woken up, there's another layer of mind games going on. These include, if James attacks with Calyrex, what should Geo do? Attacking is a risky play, as Geo's Koraidon will move first and take it out, or a Sucker Punch from Bonnet would also finish it off before it can attack. With this offensive pressure from Geo, it's likely that James will switch it to Incineroar. In this case, Geo could double up into that slot, with both a Close Combat and Sucker Punch, to catch the Incineroar on the switch, or take Calyrex out if it stays in attacks. James also attempts to protect his Koraidon, as it's the only way for it to survive if it wakes up into an attack. James does switch Calyrex into Incineroar, and Koraidon wakes up and gets the protect. Bonnet did go for Sucker Punch as well, but it fails into the switch. Giovanni did go for Close Combat, but he targeted James's Koraidon, dealing no damage into the protect. Thanks to the Calyrex switch out, Brute Bonnet was able to consume its Citrus Berry for some recovery. James made the exact play to counter Geo's attacks, and he got the wake up on Koraidon when he needed it, to claw his way back into the game. Now Incineroar is exerting fake out pressure into both of Geo's Pokemon, but he can't fake out both, and with his Koraidon so low, a single attack from either would finish it off. Now to diminish this fake out pressure, Geo protects with Koraidon while attacking with Brute Bonnet. We still can't confirm which Koraidon is faster at this point, but James does opt to target Geo's with a Flame Charge. Geo protects with his Koraidon as Brute Bonnet flinches from the fake out. James's Flame Charge bounces off Geo's Protect. Now with fake out pressure alleviated, we find ourselves in another highly volatile turn. Sucker Punch into James's Koraidon would finish it off. This is very threatening, and James is likely to protect Koraidon or switch it out to avoid this Sucker Punch. Does Geo read a switch and double into that slot with a Flame Charge? James's Koraidon can protect again, so a double up while leaving Incineroar free to attack could lose the game. Perhaps he should Spore Incineroar while threatening the Sucker Punch pressure to force a Protect or switch. A Spore into Incineroar is what he locks in. What he does with Koraidon may seem perplexing. He swaps it out for Flutter Mane. James does protect his Koraidon and locks in a knockoff into Geo's Koraidon. Geo's Koraidon swaps out for Flutter Mane, while James's Koraidon protects. Incineroar picks up the KO on Flutter Mane with a knockoff, as Incineroar goes to sleep from a Spore. Koraidon comes right back in for Geo, setting the sun. That turn may have seemed like an incredibly odd play, sacrificing the Flutter Mane, but there are a couple of reasons he might have done this. One, he could have expected James to switch Incineroar out for Calyrex and protect Koraidon. That would give Geo the breathing room he needed to make a switch like this. If Flutter Mane survived the turn, he would be able to bring Koraidon back in, resetting the sun, allowing Flutter Mane to outspeed all of James's Pokemon and pick up KOs onto Koraidon or Calyrex. Even if Flutter Mane goes down like it did, this allows Koraidon to come back on the field the same turn to reset the sun, gain its attack boost, and shake off its Intimidate. This was quite the volatile turn, as Geo did have offensive pressure with a Sucker Punch threatening a KO on James's Koraidon, and a Close Combat threatening a KO on James's Incineroar. Having the speed advantage with both of those attacks, it seems like this would have been the best play. But it is possible that Geo's Koraidon would have not picked up the one-shot on Incineroar thanks to its Intimidate drop. And with the sun expiring, if it had stayed on the field, it would have been at -1 and not had its attack boost from its ability. So with James's Incineroar asleep, and Geo's Koraidon on a timer thanks to its Life Orb, what's the play? Geo makes the best play he has. He uses Rage Powder with Brute Bonnet, and Flame Charge into James's Koraidon. This covers for a Koraidon switch, and for both of James's Pokemon attacking. Regaining the defense boost from the sun, Brute Bonnet can take an attack from Koraidon and survive. This Flame Charge is guaranteed to deal damage and pick up a KO, whether James switches or stays in, and it gives the needed speed boost to outrun Calyrex. James, on the other hand, is still heavily threatened by a Sucker Punch, and does not want to lose Calyrex to an attack from Koraidon. So he opts to go for a double protect on his Koraidon, primarily to avoid the Sucker Punch. James's Koraidon fails to get the double protect, as Geo's Koraidon KOs it with a Flame Charge. Brute Bonnet does get off its Rage Powder, but has nothing to redirect. Calyrex comes in for James. With a sleeping Incineroar, the game seems secured for Geo. All he needs to do is KO Incineroar with a Close Combat, and take out Calyrex with a Sucker Punch from Brute Bonnet. But James has one more trick up his sleeve, Encore on Calyrex. Since Calyrex is faster than Brute Bonnet, it can Encore it into Rage Powder, then win the 1v1 if it cannot Sucker Punch. Koraidon will faint to one more Life Orb chip, so if it removes Incineroar, it will knock itself out, again leaving that 1v1 Calyrex versus Brute Bonnet situation. If Bonnet does go for Sucker Punch, even into an Encore, it will move before the non-priority boosted Encore, and allow Brute Bonnet to attack. But if Calyrex Encores it into Sucker Punch, it could just come down to a PP stall game, and then to struggles. Giovanni is probably expecting the Calyrex to protect this turn, to avoid a Sucker Punch, and doesn't want the game to come down to this Encore PP stall. He protects his Koraidon, likely hoping to match Calyrex's Protect, to guarantee a KO on it the following turn. Koraidon protects as Calyrex Encores Brute Bonnet into Rage Powder, while Incineroar sleeps the turn off. This Protect on Koraidon was likely the worst play from Geo in this whole set as it lost him the game. Koraidon cannot KO both targets as it only has one attack left, again thanks to the Life Orb, and Brute Bonnet cannot win against Incineroar, holding a Rocky Helmet and being at -2 attack. Bonnet uses Rage Powder as Koraidon KOs the Incineroar, but knocking itself out in the process. Now a single target Astral Barrage from Calyrex picks up the Brute Bonnet, and Game 2 goes to James. What did we learn from Game 2? Well, the biggest part of this game was that last turn Protect from Geo. It may have seemed like a complete throw, protecting in that turn when he had a seemingly guaranteed KO on both of James's Pokemon. However, we do see he was doing a little bit of an overread, expecting the Calyrex to protect and wanting to use Rage Powder to cover for the Incineroar attack should it wake up. However, knowing that Incineroar was asleep, and that a close combat would pick up a KO, a close combat and a Sucker Punch was still likely the best play at last turn, as he moved after the Encore, and had he clicked Sucker Punch, it would have moved first thanks to his priority. Not taking any credit away from James though, he played to his outs perfectly. With incredible switches and protects, he was able to stall out a huge number of sleep turns on both of his restricteds. Geo still played an amazing game, being able to reset the sun when needed, and using Brute Bonnet incredibly well to get off many spores, and threaten Calyrex with Sucker Punch on a number of turns. You can still play well all game, and one wrong turn can lose it all. Moving into Game 3, neither player needs to adjust their Pokemon, as they know the matchup in and out. Both players lead the same Pokemon they led in Games 1 and 2. The question is, will they make the same plays as the previous games, or do something different? Will James Terra Brute Bonnet again to try and sleep the Chi-Yu, and will Giovanni double down into Brute Bonnet for a KO? Geo makes a play that covers both a Fake Out into Chi-Yu, a Spore into Chi-Yu, and a Sucker Punch into Fluttermane. He swaps Chi-Yu out for Brute Bonnet and protects Fluttermane. This defensive early play works great into this slow board state, as it scouts for Terra on Brute Bonnet, and his own Brute Bonnet switching in doesn't mind the Fake Out at all and is immune to Spore. James on the other hand decides to go for a mix of his prior two leads. Chi-Yu swaps out for Brute Bonnet as Fluttermane protects. Incineroar chips Geo's Brute Bonnet with a Fake Out, while James's Sucker Punch from Brute Bonnet whiffs on the protecting Fluttermane. In this final set of the tournament, the stakes could not be higher. Both players well know how impactful sleep is in this matchup, and removing that will be a huge advantage. James deliberates whether he should Terra his Brute Bonnet like he did in Game 1, as it will allow it to survive an incoming Moonblast, but then he will have no Pokemon immune to Spore, considering Brute Bonnet loses its Grass typing. Giovanni also might just switch Fluttermane out, to preserve it for the late game as he did before, so James locking his Sucker Punch into that slot is also risky. James eventually decides not to Terra his Brute Bonnet, banking that Fluttermane will switch out, or if it doesn't, he can potentially survive a Moonblast, and he likely spores into the Fluttermane slot, expecting a switch. Geo on the other hand makes an incredibly aggressive read that Brute Bonnet will stay in and not Terra. He guns it down with a Moonblast, and likely targets it with a Spore from his own Brute Bonnet to cover for a possible Terra. Giovanni, however, does more than target it with a Moonblast. He commits his Terra Stellar on Fluttermane to guarantee the one-hit knockout if it stays a Dark type, or still deal huge damage if it does Terra. James's Bonnet falls in one hit to the Moonblast, while his Incineroar knocks off Geo's Bonnet's Citrus Berry. Brute Bonnet lands a Spore into Incineroar, putting it to sleep, as James brings in Koraidon. With the speed advantage on Fluttermane, Giovanni is firmly in the driver's seat here. He can Moonblast for a one-shot into Koraidon, or chunk Incineroar for big damage while it sleeps. A Protect from Koraidon is likely to stall sleep turns on Incineroar, and block an incoming Spore, so Geo just needs to target the right slots. He targets Incineroar for guaranteed damage, and likely spores into Koraidon to put it to sleep if it goes for Fluttermane. This play covers anything James could do. It will get guaranteed damage, no matter if James switches or protects, and is likely to land another sleep. Although it may seem like it's leaving Fluttermane vulnerable, it is still quite safe with its Focus Sash. Koraidon terrestrializes to fire, which ensures that it will survive a possible incoming Moonblast. Fluttermane hits Incineroar for just under 50% with a Moonblast, and Koraidon moves next, picking up the one-shot on Brute Bonnet with a Collision Course. Incineroar sleeps the turn off, and Giovanni brings in Chi-Yu. James was able to make some progress by removing the Mushroom, but he's still in a bad position. He didn't get a speed boost from Flame Charge, and wasn't able to break Fluttermane's Focus Sash. Geo now has two faster threats on board that both deal huge damage, and he even has spread damage from Chi-Yu. The game is his to take by keeping up his immense offensive pressure. With Beads of Ruin on the field, Incineroar will fall to a second Moonblast. Koraidon can protect this turn, so finishing off Incineroar would be a guaranteed play, but not targeting Koraidon could allow it to get a speed boost, or KO Chi-Yu with another Collision Course. Geo decides that it's too risky not to target the Koraidon slot at this point, and locks in his Terra Stellar boosted Shadow Ball into it. while locking in Heat Wave from Chi-Yu. Koraidon does indeed protect, helping James to stall Sun turns and maybe get the speed advantage in his favor. Fluttermane's Shadow Ball bounces off the protect, as Chi-Yu connects its Heat Wave into Incineroar. Despite it being a resisted attack, it still deals 33%, meaning another Heat Wave will take Incineroar out, while Incineroar again sleeps the turn away. Now with Koraidon's Protect off the table, Geo can make the exact same play of Shadow Ball into Koraidon and Heat Wave. James is left with no outs, he cannot reliably protect, and a switch into Calyrex would just see it fainting to this offense. The only hope he has is to see if he can survive the Shadow Ball Heat Wave, or perhaps hoping for a Heat Wave miss. Fluttermane lands its Shadow Ball into Koraidon, dealing 73%. Chi-Yu moves next and connects the Heat Wave into both targets, dealing enough damage to take out both of these fire types, despite this being a resisted hit. James is left with just Calyrex on the field against 3 of Geo's remaining Pokemon. Calyrex easily falls to these 2 special offensive threats, as both of them are faster, and James has no play that can get him out of this 3v1 situation, giving Geo the win for Game 3, the set, and the 2025 World Championships. In Game 3, we saw how making different plays with the same Pokemon within a set can really lead to some crazy mind games, as both players have led the same Pokemon each of the 3 games in the set, but what they did with them each time was completely different. And seeing a defensive play early from Geo, allowing him to reposition Chi-Yu out for Brute Bonnet, kept Fluttermane incredibly safe, and the turn 1 Protect blocking the Sucker Punch was incredibly valuable for keeping Fluttermane alive. We also saw he went for an incredibly aggressive play with the Terrastellar Moonblast, picking up the one-shot on Brute Bonnet. The combo of picking up that one-shot and landing a Spore into Incineroar just put Geo so far ahead, it was nearly impossible for James to come back. We also saw the incredible value of moving first, as both of Geo's special attacking threats are faster than James's whole team with a Choice Scarf on Chi-Yu and the speed boost on Fluttermane. With James having no speed control, again we can see how moving first just gives such an immense advantage in all games. This really was an amazing set, and one absolutely fit for a World Championship Finals. Thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel, and thank you for watching.